Well, I'm just going to say also, like, if you do want to ask those questions, I don't know if we could try to do it now. If you go to the app for this session, I think there's an opportunity there to ask a question. So I'm not promising that, but if you can, that would be good. But anyway, Sam, how are we starting this? We're going to...
I think we should introduce
the panel. Let's go.
Our guests here, and then I think we should talk to Satoshi for a bit.
Let's do it. Richard.
Hi, everybody. I feel like I'm on a sports event with this little mic. It's fantastic. Maybe it is a sport. So, yeah, Richard Muirhead is my name. I work with Fabric. I kicked around in Web 1, building a company. And I also was fortunate enough to kind of play around with some of the early primitives of machine learning in my second company in Web 2. With the aspiration of getting people coordinated at scale and augmented with the power of algorithms. It was pretty early, before ImageNet, so arguably premature. And then I've been building Fabric essentially for 10 years, since 2013. And I met somebody who was running some kind of Bitcoin node right at the beginning of 2009.
2009.
Correct. But I have no idea who that was. I can't help any beyond that.
Okay, that's early.
My name is Francesco Rulli. Originally, I'm from Italy, and I've been here for over 30 years. Back in 2001, I met an actor, John Malkovich, who started a clothing line. At the end of our venture in fashion, he spoke to me about the difficulties of film distribution and launched a company called Filmanics. Filmanics' goal was basically distribution of independent movies worldwide. Coincidentally, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, came to us to distribute 2,000 videos. And one of those videos was featuring Roya Mahmoub, Ferishteh Forog, and Elaha Mahmoub. There were 3 Afghan women building a classroom in Afghanistan. So my brother and I decided at that point to finance the construction of 13 classrooms and empower young women to be financially self-efficient. Roya became 2013 most influential for Time 100. And during that trip, actually a month before, my brother had talked to me about how people were getting arrested for using Bitcoin. And it was kind of a freaky experience because we went to meet with the guys from Union Square Ventures, and I asked a very simple question. What can be a solution for me to send micropayments to Afghanistan? And he mentioned again the word Bitcoin. So we started that day, let's say 2 months later, to send payments in Bitcoin. We had over 20,000 students leveraging this technology and learning how to blog and make money off of what they were writing. So that's how I ended up in this crypto space. 4 years later, we started having problems managing the schools, so we decided to start using IBM Watson and the different solutions of artificial intelligence to replace the students, the teachers. And that's when we started building our first chatbots. Some of the chatbots, the early chatbots we created were actually in Farsi instead of in English. We have done different projects, and a few years ago, I was back in Florence, and we started discussing also with the Duomo of Florence the possibility of building the artificial intelligence of Michelangelo. So we did that. And as of today, we have a joint venture with a company called CESA. It's a large group in Italy, and we're building the artificial intelligence of Leonardo da Vinci so that anybody can talk to him. To close this, obviously Bitcoin is the way for independence. So we decided to create the Satoshi Bot, leveraging the knowledge of what he wrote. So the artificial intelligence we created only uses the 3,391 words that he wrote. So that's where we are.
I mean, yeah, before we go to that, maybe just set that up as a conversation point that we can maybe come back to so people understand, right? An AI model can be trained on X amount of data, and in this case, it's the text that Satoshi wrote. And there was a very deliberate decision, right? Because the alternative is to train what we think Satoshi would say based on everything that's been written since then, And that ends up with a very different, well, potentially a very different result. And so it's just an interesting thing. Obviously, it could be to some people a little controversial that you would try to summon Satoshi and deign that you would be able to actually recreate the words of this human being that nobody else should be able to. But the bottom line is that, this is AI. This is the sort of things we can do. So we want to just have a conversation a little bit about the pros and cons and challenges and everything. But why don't we introduce Satoshi, him or her or they self.
Yeah, so if we can get the Satoshi Bot up on screen here.
Okay.
All right, there it is. So one of the things we did was we created some basic questions to ask the Satoshi Bot to see what it would respond to. Again, this is a model only trained on the text that Satoshi had ever written. And that was sort of the goal of this. The first question was, why did you build Bitcoin? This is actually what Satoshi would wear, I've heard.
I think, yeah. We figured that out.
Bad Wi-Fi.
It is a long time getting to Satoshi.
I like his tie, though.
Can we get the audio?
We have the audio?
If you click on the side there.
All right. Shall I just read it? Okay, I'll just read it.
Or he can write it again.
Yeah. So I built Bitcoin because I saw the flaws in the traditional financial system and the need for a decentralized peer-to-peer digital currency that could be used globally without intermediaries. I also wanted to create a currency that was secure, fungible, and could not be easily manipulated or controlled by any single entity or government. Bitcoin's underlying technology, the blockchain, was designed to be immutable and transparent, allowing for a trustless system where transactions could be verified by anyone on the network. Overall, I built Bitcoin as a tool to empower individuals and promote financial freedom. It's that last bit that I think is the value, right? The rest of it sounds very utilitarian and instructive, but that last bit is like, okay, there's a why there, right? Yep. I don't know.
Maybe we'll go through and...
We'll go through them all, okay.
Right. All right, so the second question we asked was, why did you stop participating in Bitcoin's developer community?
Do you want me to read it again? Or can people read them? I'll read it out. I've been working on a new electronic cash system that's fully peer-to-peer with no trusted third party. The paper is available at, you all know where that is, of course. The main benefits are double spending is prevented with a peer-to-peer network, no mining is necessary, and nodes can be run by anyone. Okay, very straightforward.
The third question we asked was, why did you include the line, the Times, 3rd of January 2009, Chancellor, on the brink of second bailout for banks in the Bitcoin Genesis block? Let's see if we can get that up.
See if we can get that up. If we can cut and paste the question, it would be quick. This might take a while if we're typing it out. There we go. Excellent.
All right.
It's kind of appropriate that we don't have the audio in a way, because we were wondering on whether or not, we could actually, what voice would we choose, right? What voice would Satoshi have? And were we going to be passing some judgment on that? And could we find a neutral voice? So in some respects, I'm the voice of Satoshi.
Yeah, you are now the voice.
That's pretty good, actually.
The root problem with conventional currency
is
all the trust that's required to make it work. The central bank must be trusted not to debase the currency, but the history of fiat currencies is full of breaches of that trust. Banks must be trusted to hold our money and transfer it electronically, but they lend it out in waves of credit bubbles with barely a fraction in reserve. We have to trust them with our privacy, trust them not to let identity thieves drain our accounts. Their massive overhead costs make micropayments impossible. With e-currency based on cryptographic proof, without the need to trust a third-party middleman, money can be secure and transactions effortless. That's why I included the reference to a news headline about bank bailouts in the Genesis block, to establish the context and the motivation behind the creation of Bitcoin as an alternative to the traditional financial system that is open to abuse and manipulation.
Okay. I must say, Richard, I don't know about you, but it sounds like an Aussie accent.
Well, I was going to.
We were just going to say, that apparently is the neutral internet accent, but I don't know.
Finally, we know the truth.
Clearly Australian.
We know the truth.
It's clearly Australian. All right, the fourth one.
And then the final question we asked was, do you know Craig Stephen Wright?
I'm no longer involved in that and I cannot verify anyone's identity.
Okay. In that? What is that? But I think, remember, this was trained on, the early all the writings and nothing else. So presumably it doesn't know.
Well, so that's a good segue, I think.
Yes.
Identity.
Okay.
And
So, I mean, just to set up, what we tried to do is we said, let's train this on the most tight model of information we could, only the words that Satoshi had ever said. And that way, if you wanted to have a conversation, this is the only reference we have. So you can have both good and challenging conversations based on that, which I think opens the question of, how good the model is in terms of being able to be a source of truth for you, because everything is interpretive. And I guess, Richard, Francesco, what do you guys think of the idea that can you truly have a conversation with someone if you only know less than 3,000 of their words?
Well, based on our experience looking at the life of Michelangelo, life of Leonardo da Vinci, Satoshi, or Nikola Tesla we're working on, it's very important for all of us to decide how much we want to broaden our horizons in reference to the development of technology, of society. So we are in front of this it's almost a biblical problem, right? So when you are basically reading word by word the 3,000 words, you will get a different perspective, just like if you read any holy book and so on, then if you actually have an evolution of those. So I personally prefer the evolution, but I also understand that if there are no check and balances, if there is not an intelligent use of, for example, the blockchain for verification, we can find ourselves lost in a marasma of fake news. So, very important.
Exactly. Well, I was going to exactly, build on that by saying, we've jumped a step. I mean, how do I know which body of work the algorithm was trained upon? We've only met in person right now. You just made that attestation. I would like to have some proof, because I'm going to listen to this and I'm going to spark off it and think, okay, right. The original intention was to empower people. So I was right that originally this whole endeavor to build a new form of money was just a kind of a very overblown prototype for a way of coordinating people and and empowering them. And so that's what I've taken from that. But that's just because you've told me that it was built on these 3,000 words from Satoshi. So I think being able to determine that the identity of the people who originally created those words and verify the fact that that was the content that was used to train the algorithm is going to be absolutely vital.
And let's get to this in a moment, because I think this really is going to be a very important discussion around, can this technology, can Web3, can blockchain be a valuable tool in giving us the validation, the verification that's needed through this process. But I just want to quickly just throw to you, Francesco, as a way to maybe take this idea of the sort of imagined, evolved identity one step further and tell people a little bit about the Michelangelo bot that you created for the Cathedral of Florence, and how you opened it up. People could then ask questions of it, and there was one particular question that was very interesting.
So the most common question, actually, one of the most frequent questions to Michelangelo is about his sexual orientation. And Michelangelo wrote poems of love for Tomasi de Cavalieri, a gentleman from Rome. But because of, let's say, historical pressure, these poems were changed the pronouns into female pronouns. And the Florence Cathedral Museum, which the head is actually Monsignor Verdone, a priest, decided it was fair to declare the truth that Michelangelo had this love for this man. A couple of months before the Pope announced that the Catholic Church would take a different position. Vice versa, other institutions in Florence in which we collaborated with, when the question was asked, they didn't want that to be told. And I can tell you that ChatGPT will now actually tell you the total truth about the sexual orientation of Michelangelo in his, probably the knowledge base, but it's a very interesting thing how, the Florence Cathedral Museum took a position that is more.
It's interesting because ChatGPT, of course, is the foundation for this Satoshi
Yes.
Bot as well. And I always feel like when I'm dealing with ChatGPT that it's very diplomatic. Like it's clearly been trained. And we know about this, right? That OpenAI put a lot of work into making sure there wasn't sort of racist, misogynist sort of stuff in there, and that seems like a worthwhile goal. But the flip side, of course, is that exercise is the control of this trusted entity that you're worried about, Richard. So, I mean, yeah, maybe reflect on that problem. How do we find the balance? I mean, what would be the ideal model for training something like this? Should it be completely open-ended, or should we have people in the middle of it manipulating and making sure it comes out with something diplomatic?
Well, I mean, jumping straight to the answer, I mean, it absolutely has to be open. If we think we've got problems right now with having, tech titans with a tyrannical control over our lives because we're being influenced by social media we happen to glance at from time to time, that was like an abundance of information that somewhat influenced us. We're getting to a point now, we're going to have a surplus of kind of expertise, and the only way that I could imagine that it's not going to go down a path of the natural human, or human tendency towards corruption, is with, applying, the paradigm of open and permissionless systems you have in the blockchain. And if you think about what, we had this experiment with Bitcoin, coordinating people to create a money where it can't be corrupted by central banks. Embedded within that is this determination of a truth, like what is the contents of the ledger. And so what it opens up, and it was the thing that first got me excited in like 2013 about the concept of a DAO, is this ability to generalize that coordination around more versions of the truth. Was this the correct body of knowledge? And indeed also that you can go back and look at the provenance of a guardrail, a guideline, a definition of hate speech, or whatever, but has been generated through consensus, and you can see where it has come from. And because you're dealing in an open permissionless system, you've got the opportunity that because it's inspectable, and it's someone else can come along and build an alternative form of consensus to be wrapped around these opinions and expertise, that hopefully that battle, that sort of natural selection, will provide the environment we need to temper things. But I think
that the hopefully bit is hopefully, right?
Well, I say hopefully in the sense that it hasn't happened. I'm investing in this space because I'm optimistic it will. And this next wave of applications, everybody's looking for use cases in Web3. Everyone's looking for what's going to be the impact of Web3 on social, because it's so critical to us these days. Web3 is social. The very heart of Web3 is identity. And your social capital and your capital, and what makes it so potent and allows it to coordinate people. And so, but we want that intersection between identity and the identification of facts that have come from those individuals. A lot of great work and opportunity for projects around that, and these opinions, this expertise that is going to be like there's going to be a surplus of over the internet. But I think my hope or my optimism comes from the fact that we can break out of having ad revenue drive, the construction of today's corporations, which is what it does, to one where there can be many different possible business models that can be of more collective and mutual benefit. So I think at the end of the day, we're philanthropic, we're benevolent in some senses, but we're also self-interested in many other senses. And so coordinating and balancing those two things in these new systems is the exciting challenge, shall we call it.
I want to ask a sort of larger question. This is trained on 3,000 words of Satoshi. We have 3 million words from Vitalik, and we have his voice, and we have his image. So, Francesco and I have talked about this a lot. You could take just the information he's given to the world, and you could have Vitalik live forever. But we don't talk a lot about the idea of intent and approval. So we were on stage yesterday with Juana Ruxandra, who runs the digital practice for Warner Music Group. And we had the question about, I don't know if everyone saw, there was a Drake and The Weeknd AI-driven song that went very viral, had a million plus views on YouTube last week. It got taken down because the label said, you don't have the rights for this. In the same week, Grimes came out and said, anyone can make a song with my voice, just give me half the money, right? So in talking to Awana, what she said, which I thought was really interesting, is the idea of, even if you could verify the source of truth to say, this is Drake's voice that was used on the ingestion, he is not giving you the approval to use it to make a song that he doesn't think is of quality to put out, because that affects his bottom line and his image. And I think one of the things we have to think about is, even would Satoshi want this to be in the world, even though we want it to be in the world because we want to know more. And I think so it's not only just about verifiable sources of truth and how do we make sure it's not over monetized. I also think there has to be something around how do we look at the idea of intent and that original sources of truth are okay with how the variations of how things may be used. And I guess I would wonder what you guys would think about that. Francesco?
So definitely it's very important to, all right, there are two sides of the situation, all right? Who creates the artificial intelligence, who manages it, and who actually accesses the information, right? So when you're a passive user, you're obviously more subject to be influenced one way or the other, right? So having a plan in line with what you described, it's vital for both ends of the spectrum. So those who create, what do they want to achieve, and those that use, what do they want to learn. But I believe that everybody should get familiar with the use of artificial intelligence, just like being on social media gives you an idea of what even, let's say, our children use, right? So I have TikTok account so I can see what's going on and how it's structured, or a Snapchat account. The same concept goes for me in terms of using artificial intelligence as a tool. And then also the insights you can get out of artificial intelligence can be a game changer for many, many people. So when we had our chatbots built in Farsi, we were able to collect information from street children in Afghanistan, not because they had a smartphone, they didn't, because we involved other teenagers who had smartphones to stop and talk to the street children who lived in extreme poverty and to understand their needs. And this report was then shared with Unilever and Save the Children. So it was a collaboration where the tool was just a mean to an end, in which was gathering information to improve their living situation, you know.
Love Awana, and I work at Warner. So, I mean, this is a big shift. So I think, you know, it's a King Canute moment. Actually, one of my brother's businesses was put out of business when he used short clips of cricket mainly on a fair use basis to build something that was a little bit like Vine for sports, if you remember that platform. And then was creating a new business model out of it. And it was the ECB and Sky or whatever objected to it, and well, it went down in the end, but it was close in the judgment of some new law. And I think we're just going to have to come up with some new models. So, you know, Grimes, in a sense, is kind of pointing towards a kind of a fair use, like use a bit of my intellectual property. I'll be cool with that. That makes me, you know, more popular. If you want to have it officially sanctioned, and then I can collaborate with you and to do more. I mean, you've got this whole area of, and we've just been looking at a whole bunch of marketplaces for generative art combined with AI. You know, it's not just art, it's like obviously multimedia. You know, with that such a significant shift, you know, and this opportunity for many different business models to be defined, I think it's not worth fighting, you know, and holding on to the old world. We've got to move to the new world.
I'm really glad you're bringing up the business model part of this, right? Because I think that if people are looking at AI and wondering what to do about it, I think the natural instinct is, okay, support or not, right? Shut it down. And that's, we've seen some people, we've seen the open letter from thousands of supposed AI scientists saying do so, which seems to me crazy, because you'll end up like, shutting down innovation to deal with the problem and essentially creating, anointing as the winner the existing players, right? And it's like, and then that gets to the business model. If you're a centralized profit-seeking entity and you don't have a decent, OpenAI is not an open company. It's Microsoft owned, right? So, this is what Web 2 taught us. Web 2 taught us that the business model around extracting data to feed into these centralized platforms, as opposed to a more decentralized relationship between users and content producers, creates a lot of problems. So yeah, to me it comes out of the business model ultimately is going to be the solution.
Yeah, I don't know how in the kind of the folks who are, well, that letter that came out saying like, let's slow down. Oh, by the way, I'm just starting an AI company. Yeah. I mean, it's almost an example of the hypocrisy and corruption that inevitably happens the moment you allow one person to have that level of influence. And the other factor that I think is sort of pretty important in the area you're describing around business model and the notion of shutting down one approach versus another is that there's nobody who can just shut things down globally. Right. And so you squeeze the balloon in one area, and it was seen with kind of generally with regulation, it's just going to pop up somewhere else, and people are going to experiment furiously, hopefully with some better models. And I think we're playing around with money. We're playing. I'm deliberately using the word playing around with art. Obviously, hopefully, this becomes a way of people accessing knowledge and compounding the ability of people to innovate and capturing medical information and compounding our ability to cure that is of immense, use to humanity. So they're going to be countries, jurisdictions, whatever, or borderless, entities who are going to seize that opportunity. So, we're going to be able to hold that back.
Sam, it looks like we're running out of time. I mean, so we may not be able to get a question, but it clearly wouldn't be able to ask another one of Satoshi. I didn't see any come in through the app, so I may just be not doing this right. But I thought it might just be fun, nonetheless. Show of hands, and we're not going to be able to ask it. It's going to take too long. But if you could ask a question of Satoshi, hands up. What? I'll just have to pick one of you to see. Anybody would have a particular question that you would most want to ask of Satoshi? Okay. Yes, sir. That is, what do you think of inscriptions and the Oracles project? Ordinals, sorry. I actually asked that question. We asked that very question. Yep, and what was interesting is we asked, there were the two versions. There was one where it was trained on the original text, and he didn't know what it was, right? As you'd expect. The other one, and then also, I thought, Francesco, we were part of this process. The first one was on just the text. It was a little cautious. It sort of said something like, yeah, I don't know what that is. Of course, you can build other things on it, but you're going to be careful of block size. There's a limited space here. This might compromise the security of Bitcoin. But the open one, this was the one question, in fact, that it seemed to be quite a different perspective. The open one came back and said, Bitcoin's for everybody. You can build what you want on it. This is a sort of an idea for the future. And that struck me as like the Satoshi of the open community, investing all of this belief in what it might be. Which one's right or wrong, we've got no idea. But it's a really good question, an excellent question. Thank you. All right, so on that note, round of applause for the panel, everybody.